So I've got a few things in the works and absolutely none of them are going to be done by this weekend. So today I figured I would go over something that I've been wanting to do for a while and talk about hammer handling. I have touched on it in a few videos in the past, but haven't really got into very much detail about how and why and what. This is actually kind of my everyday hammer. This is the one I use for work. It's, yeah, pretty beaten up. And it's actually been in this state for a number of years now. This handle cracked almost immediately after I did it because I overstruck and whacked it, and yeah. So this was just, I screwed up, broke a handle, and it was before I even got it blackened. Anyway, hammer handling. Basically, we are going to start by just hacking off this handle. Hammer handling doesn't seem to really get talked about quite as much as hammer making, at least not in the blacksmithing communities, from what I've seen. And in my opinion, not most, but I'd say a lot of people are just flat doing it wrong. The main thing that I see people doing that kind of gets on my nerves is mostly forcing the handle through the hammer eye. There we go. Not taking time to actually shape the handle to actually fit the eye. They just kind of jam it home and call it good. Honestly, that ends up being the issue for why your hammer handles are breaking and falling off or splitting and coming loose and all that kind of stuff. So if you were to look at the wood fibers under a microscope, you would see that it's largely a hollow kind of lattice structure. And it is actually that lattice structure that gives you strength. When you start driving hammer handles that don't fit into the eye, you're driving into a conical shape that is literally crushing all of those fibers. Highest stress concentration on a hammer handle is right where it meets the hammer. So if you go and you weaken the most critical part of your handle, it's no surprise that that's where it's going to break. But if you look at what we have here, this is all crushed. This is where you drive the wedges in, and this is intentionally crushed and smashed and forced into the top half of the eye. The strength is all down in the base of the base of the eye, the bottom half of the handle. This top half just keeps it from flying off the end. It's this bottom half that actually does all the work of holding the hammer still. And in fact, in one of my previous videos, you'll actually see me using my dog's head hammer without any of the wedges in place and actually forging with it and moving some material. Granted, it ended up coming off at one point and almost hit me in the head. But the important thing here is the bottom half of the handle where it fits through the eye. That you want to make sure is not being forced. Make sure that your handle is in contact with as much of the eye as possible before you actually make those final little taps to actually seat it into the eye. So in this case, we are still about an 1/8 inch off of each end. I'm just going to be doing this with an old farrier rasp and a half-round file. Doesn't need to be anything fancy. And for these first couple passes, I'm gonna go with the rough side of the rasp, and you want to make sure you're not taking a bunch of material off the end. because that'll turn into a point pretty quick if you're not being careful about it. I'll go ahead and take this over to the vise. Out of the box, the handle is longer this way and narrower this way. We have enough material further down back here, but we will need to narrow this up so that it fits all the way down. We try to avoid taking any material off the sides here and focus just on the top and the bottom. One of the important things is to make sure that you keep your handle, the portion that goes through the eye, parallel with the flats of your handle. You can adjust some of that later if you've got a big enough handle, but these handles are pretty close to the finished size that I actually like, so I need to try to keep the portion going through the eye as accurate as possible. We're still a decent ways off here. You definitely want to sneak up on that. As you go too far, and you don't have very many opportunities to correct yourself. Okay, so that seems like we're getting most of the way through. I'm going to switch to the half round. And we're just going to round off these. This would be a little quieter if I was further back on it, but my flats for this handle are pretty far away from the portion that goes through the. That's actually quite close. And go one more pass with that half round file. And I definitely don't want to be taking anything off the sides. Alright, so now we've actually gotten very close, just fitting by hand. We're about a ½ inch away from where I want to finish. We're already flush on the top, so technically if it fit here, you could drive your wedges and basically be done. But like I said, I want this to sit down a little bit further, and I am not done. So to find out how much we need to take off and where, we're basically just going to give a few little taps on the bottom. We're not driving it into the hardy hole or into the vise or anything like that. We're just light taps in the air, let the hammer's own inertia be the force against the handle, and that gives you witness marks that show where material needs to come off, and we are very close. Work right here on the anvil, because this is only going to take a couple rounds of tweaking, it looks like. And I'm literally just taking off the witness marks. That's it. The little black spots that got left behind, that is all I want to touch right now. And even these up here, I'm leaving alone because they are actually going to end up being what wedges the top half of the eye. Okay, and now we are close enough. You want to make sure you have some kind of indicator so that you know which way the handle goes in, so that you're not making more work for yourself. Which I should have done that on the last round, but such is life. Now you can hear it got solid there. This is probably pretty much done. Yeah, we're pretty much done already. Got a nice mark all the way around. Oh, so what I'm going to do now is just take the base around here, because now we're actually starting to get a little bit of a lip. So I'm going to start here and blend it back in to the witness mark until the witness marks come off. And the reason why I'm starting down here is because if you don't take the material off here and blend it back in, then what happens is you end up catching that lip with the edge of the hammer and you start shearing off those fibers again, which is exactly what we're trying to avoid. So you just barely took that lip off. Now, I'm saying lip, but it's just barely a depression. Up. And that's about as good as I think we need to get it. See, now we're not getting just a couple really dark marks, and I'm not going to bother taking those off at this point. So now, with these lined up, like I said, we're just letting the inertia of the hammer resist the handle getting driven. Any more than that, and then you start crushing the wood. But that's a good taper fit there. In fact, as long as you're not pulling, yeah, see there, those last couple of strikes I pulled. But that's quite a lot for a hammer that doesn't have any wedges in the handle. and you can't feel a lip, which means you don't have a stress point. All right, so let's wedge it. Yeah, we can see there's a little bit of a nick in my handle that needs to come off, and I'm just going to use a little file, take that off real quick. Should have done that before I started fitting, but I missed it. So, if your eye doesn't have a lot of shape to it, like if it's very straight, doesn't have a lot of taper to it, or it just has a lot of damage and tooling marks inside, you can clean that up either with a file or with a die grinder bit and a drill, or an actual die grinder if you have a die grinder, and just go in and clean it up. This is the actual bit that I used to dress this hammer over a decade ago, and it has worked well for me since. In fact, you can actually see there's some tooling marks on the top half here. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Actually, you may not be able to see that. There are some tooling marks in here that I'm not worried about because they're on the top half of the eye. If they were on the bottom, I'd be quite concerned about that because those are going to damage your fibers. But like I said, the bottom half or the bottom 2/3 are all that you really need to have seated very well. The rest of it is literally mushroomed on the top. That's cleaned up, dressed out. There's no stress points or anything. Our handle is dressed out so we don't have much of a lip. In fact, we can just barely feel a little bit right there, but that just lets us know that everything's seated nicely. There's no excessive crushing or force anywhere. We've got a nice taper fit that all kind of fits and seats in and compresses all of those wood fibers evenly, instead of crushing all of these here, crushing all of these here, and then everything in the center is still soft and pliable. That's how your handles end up getting loose. Either that or you just never fit them very well to begin with, and you skip the last couple steps that we just did. But with that in place, I did cut the slot down a little bit so it goes just a little bit past halfway, which should be plenty. Get my other hammer, and all we're doing is just a few light taps. How it went solid there, we'll do that again. There, hear that change? That's what you're looking for. And you can see we don't have any splintering. There's no damage out of the bottom of the eye. There's no gaps. Everything fits in really nicely. If it's splintered and you've got spots that are kind of blowing out, you screwed up. And if you look online, a lot of professional hammer makers are making this mistake. How much? Let's have. We'll just see. We'll just go ahead and use this one. It's close, but the gap there plus the gap there are almost exactly the width of this wedge. Okay. So we just cut the excess off with a hacksaw. Preferably not a dull one. If your handles are particularly precious to you, you might want to do something to protect the top of the eye. My hammers in general, and especially this one, are not precious to me. So I am okay with giving her a little bit of the old abuse. Everybody uses hot cut chisels for splitting wood, right? And I'm tapering this end so that it fits down into the eye without getting crushed. And I probably put a little bit more taper on there than necessary, but that's okay. And in this case, we actually don't want to be working against the inertia of the hammer, because if we're driving down this way, the inertia of the hammer is going to want to come back up off of the handle. And we did tighten up quite a bit. Yep, that's as far as that's going to go. Let's get that file. We'll take these nasty bits off. Escalate this to a rasp. These guys are pretty beat up. I'm going to reuse them anyway. And again, we don't want to work against the inertia of the hammer, so I'm working with the handle on the base of the anvil. And I prefer to use 3 wedges. Drive one into the center. And then the other 2 close to that. And you can shame me for reusing wedges if you like. I do not care. All right. And that's basically done. There are a lot of finishes that you can use on a hammer handle, and my personal favorite is just the burnt and linseed oiled finish. The soot and the grit leaves a little bit of a grip on the handle. It is messy, quite messy for the first month or so. Your hands definitely do go black, and it does take a while for it to kind of wear in. And depending on how dry the handle is to begin with, it's going to possibly need to be oiled a few times. But that is my personal favorite. Just a couple notes about the actual handle blank that I used. This one was a Bloom. Get it from the Farrier Supply. A Bloom. They are the closest to ideal size for me. I am not a fan of real big heavy handles, and really skinny handles actually make my hands hurt. I get cramps in ye old elbow. This particular one is not really a great specimen. The grain isn't straight. It's actually kind of at a 45 like this. And if you notice, the saw cut through it was kind of the opposite direction. Just not a huge problem. You definitely don't want the grain running this way, perpendicular to the hammer, or parallel to the hammer face, perpendicular to the axis. You definitely want the grain more up and down. This one is that way. This one is quite straight on axis. At least the important part is straight and on axis. It does have this little bit of a whoop-de-woo down at the bottom, but that's inconsequential because that's not really doing much of any work. It's basically this area in here that you want to make sure is straight. Really, maybe down through here, This one's kind of, like I said, about 30 degrees off. Much more than that, you just want to skip it. So you definitely want to buy these in person where you can inspect them, because they're not always straight. I've had some pretty bad ones, even from them, and even with their price point, because I think these things are like $11, and that's a fair bit of money for a hammer handle, I think. But like I said, they are the shape I like. Their size is just a tiny bit over what I prefer, but by the time you burn it, it's down and it's done. The old handle for this one, like I said, I overstruck and I hit the handle really bad very early on and it cracked. I had replaced it while I was actually working and didn't have time to burn it at the time. And yeah, in fact, this crack right here is the one that developed almost immediately. In any case, this one is not ideal, but it is good enough, and I'm going to go ahead and burn it and stop talking. And I'm just using a MAP gas torch, and I like to burn it until it actually has an open flame, until it's physically burning itself. Just kind of charring the surface doesn't have the same effect. And actually, historically speaking, this is the way blacksmiths would have finished a handle on a hammer that they had made. Because the handle would have been made with a draw knife. And then they would burn all the splinters and unevenness off, and then use the block brush to actually smoothen it out. You don't necessarily need to do this with a block brush. It's what I'm using because it's what I have. Just a regular wire brush works pretty much as well. The only thing I would note is you don't want to go along the grain, especially with a round bristle brush, because that can actually dig down into the grain and start to pull pieces back up again. So the whole idea here is this actually takes off little high spots, minor high spots, and the burning absolutely removes 100% of chance of having any splinters anywhere on the handle, which is one of my favorite things about this, aside from looking cool. And I'm just using a couple disposable shop towels. And this handle is pretty dry, so it's probably going to soak up a fair amount of oil. Yeah, all of that is gone already. And I will probably need to oil this another couple times. but get it to where it stays shiny. See how it's soaking up? Okay, now I can feel it starting to sit on top. Make sure you're not leaving your rags in a pile, because this stuff will eventually cause an exothermic reaction and combust. I'm not a fan of the use of the word spontaneous, because it is not spontaneous. It's a chemical reaction. So there we go. One new handle. I was actually hoping to reharden and rehandle this one today. That's actually what the nicer handle is for. Was not able to get to it, mostly because I actually have my forge taken apart right now, so I can do some other things, which was supposed to be this weekend's video, but this weekend's video is going to have to be next weekend or maybe a little later, depending on how long it takes me to do some of the fiddly crap I'm doing over there. Anyhow, I hope this was worth watching. If you're still watching now, I am sorry for rambling so much. I have difficulty telling whether or not I've actually made my point or not. And I hope I made it here. And I hope it helps you and helps your hammer handles last a little bit longer, stay a little bit tighter, and you can spend more time forging and less time around with crappy hammer handles. I will see you next time.